Hey guys, quick creepy fact. Only 20% of you watching are subscribed. It's totally free and helps me write more scary stories like this one. Thank you for the support. Now let's dive right in. I had always wanted to own a house. Not just any house either. I wanted something I could make my own from the ground up. Something I could paint and decorate exactly how I liked. Something that actually felt like home. It was one of those dreams I carried around for years without even realizing how heavy it had gotten. Every time I scrolled past listings online, every time I saw those perfect little front porches with rocking chairs and planters, it was like a quiet ache in my chest. Owning a house just always felt out of reach. Until I found this one. The listing barely had any photos, and the description wasn't exactly selling it, but the price was so low it almost felt like a mistake. I figured it couldn't hurt to go take a look. Worst case, I would have wasted a Saturday afternoon. Best case, maybe it would be the miracle I had been hoping for. The owner met me there, an older guy who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. He barely said hello before launching into the story of how he'd inherited the place from some distant relative he barely knew. He told me he had never needed the house, never wanted it, and definitely never cared for it. The way he talked about it made it sound like a burden more than anything else. Standing there on the crumbling front steps, it was pretty obvious why. The house was old. Really old. The kind of old where you could just feel it pressing down on you. The weight of all the years soaked into the wood and the stone. From the outside, it looked like something you would see in one of those abandoned house horror stories online. The roof had caved in near the back, and one entire side of the house was missing a wall. Vines had crawled up the broken brickwork like claws, and every window either had shattered glass or was boarded up with rotting planks. Even knowing all that, I still felt this crazy pull toward it. I could already picture fresh white paint on the siding, cozy warm lighting shining through clean windows. Furniture I picked out piece by piece. I wasn't looking at what it was. I was seeing what it could be. The walk-through was quick. Honestly, there wasn't much to walk through. Inside, it was even worse than outside. Broken bottles crunched under my sneakers with every step. The smell of damp, rotten, stale beer clung to the air so thick it made my nose burn. Old sleeping bags, pizza boxes, piles of garbage. It looked like teenagers or squatters had been using the place for years. Every wall was cracked or stained. Whole sections of the floor felt like they could give out under my weight. Still, it didn't scare me off. I think if I had walked around a little longer, really taken my time, maybe I would have noticed the things that didn't quite add up. Maybe I would have seen the hidden door tucked away under the stairs, half swallowed by shadows. Maybe I would have realized the silence inside the house wasn't normal, that it wasn't the kind of stillness you find in an empty place. It was heavier than that. Smothering. But I didn't see any of that. I just saw a chance. After a few weeks of paperwork, most of which I barely skimmed, and way too many signatures, the house was officially mine. I still remember how excited I was that Saturday morning, pulling up the cracked driveway for the first time with the keys jingling in my hand. The sun was bright, the air smelled like cut grass from the house down the street, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I had actually done it. I owned a home. Looking back, I wonder how things would have gone if I had just listened to that tiny voice inside me telling me something was wrong. Maybe if I had listened, I wouldn't be sitting here now, staring down at the bandaged stump where two of my fingers used to be. But I didn't listen. I was too busy dreaming. The second I stepped out of my car, I felt it. That weird, heavy stillness you only notice when you're paying attention. The neighborhood wasn't bad. Most of the houses were small but cute, little ranch styles with tidy yards and peeling paint. You could tell people cared, even if they didn't have a lot. It should have felt welcoming. Instead, standing in front of my new house, it felt like the whole street was holding its breath. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement across the street. I turned and spotted a woman peeking out from behind her front door. She had to be at least 70, maybe older, wrapped up in a thick knitted sweater, even though the morning was already hot enough to make me sweat. She watched me for a few long seconds before finally stepping outside. I smiled and gave a little wave, trying to seem friendly. It worked, sort of. She shuffled across the street, her thin sandals making a soft slapping noise against the cracked asphalt. Up close, I could see that her face was lined and sun-spotted, but her eyes were sharp. "Are you the new owner?" she asked, voice soft but steady. "Yeah," I said, smiling wider. "I just bought it, first house." I couldn't help the excitement bubbling up in my voice. I was proud, even if the house behind me looked like it might fall down if I slammed the car door too hard. For a second, she smiled back at me. Then, just as quickly, the smile disappeared. She looked past me at the house, and her whole face changed. "Why'd you buy it?" she asked, her voice low now, almost like she was afraid someone would overhear. I blinked, caught off guard. "It was a good price," I said with a little shrug. "And the location works for me. Close to town, quiet street." "Mrs. Cooper," she introduced herself a few seconds later, shook her head slowly, like I had just told her I was planning to camp out in a war zone. She stared at the house behind me the way you might look at something you know is dangerous but can't exactly explain why. "You know there's a reason it's abandoned," she said. I laughed lightly, hoping to brush it off, but the laugh sounded hollow even to me. "Yeah, well, a lot of work, right?" I joked. "I'm up for the challenge." Mrs. Cooper didn't laugh. She just kept talking. "The previous owner," she said, her voice dropping even lower. "Well, he died in that house." I nodded, feeling a little knot form in my stomach. I already knew that part. The seller had mentioned it casually, made it sound like an old man passing peacefully in his sleep. Sad, sure, but not anything to be scared of. But Mrs. Cooper wasn't done. "They never found the body," she said. I stared at her, thinking maybe I had misheard. "What?" I asked. She nodded, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "There were screams," she said. "Loud enough that I heard them from my porch. I was the one who called the police." She paused, frowning like she was trying to remember every detail exactly right. "When they came, there was blood. Everywhere. Pools of it. The walls, the floor, even the ceiling." I shifted on my feet, feeling the sweat bead up under my shirt. The sun felt too bright all of a sudden, too hot. "There was too much blood," Mrs. Cooper said quietly. "Way too much. Whoever it belonged to, they couldn't have survived." "So," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady, "no one actually knows if he's dead?" She nodded again. "Police confirmed it was his blood, but no body. Never found." I didn't know what to say to that. I stood there looking at my house, and for the first time since I found it online, it didn't feel like a dream anymore. It felt like a mistake. Mrs. Cooper reached out and grabbed my arm lightly. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Be careful, dear," she said. "This house is pure evil." Then, as fast as the warning came, it was like she flipped a switch. Her face brightened into a warm, grandmotherly smile, and she asked if I liked lemon cookies. She said she would bring some over later as a housewarming gift. I nodded mutely, forcing a tight smile of my own, and watched her shuffle back across the street to her tidy little house. For a long moment, I just stood there in the driveway, staring up at the house I had bought. It didn't look any different. Broken windows, collapsing roof, missing wall, same as before. But it felt different now, like something inside was watching me, waiting. Still, I didn't come all this way to back out. I squared my shoulders, grabbed my gloves, and got to work clearing out the trash. It was worse than I remembered. Bottles and cans piled up in corners, crushed cigarette packs and beer-stained mattresses, empty food wrappers and rat-chewed bags. Everything smelled sour and rotten, the air thick with years of neglect. Every step I took made the floors groan and creak under my weight. By the time the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in long streaks of orange and purple, I had filled 6 massive garbage bags just from the living room alone. I was dragging another ripped, stained sleeping bag toward the front door when I heard it. A low, deep groan. It wasn't the house settling. It wasn't the wind. It sounded alive. Heavy, animal-like, the kind of sound that vibrates in your chest, deep and slow and wrong. I froze, heart pounding. For a second, every instinct screamed at me to run, but then I shook it off. It's probably just a raccoon, I told myself, or maybe a stray dog. It's an abandoned house. Animals had to have come and gone through here for years. It was normal. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Not even close. I wasn't the type to scare easy. I had spent enough nights alone in crappy apartments to know the difference between real danger and my own imagination. Usually if something freaked me out, I could laugh it off a few minutes later. But that groan stuck with me. It wasn't just a sound, it was the way it felt. Like it had weight, like it was aimed right at me. I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a broken broom handle, and crept back inside the house, holding my phone out in front of me with the flashlight on. The weak beam cut through the dust and shadows, making the busted-up furniture and trash piles look even worse than before. I moved slowly, checking behind what was left of the furniture, nudging open broken closet doors with the broom handle. Every creak of the floorboards under my feet made my heart jump. The house was a maze of rotted wood and shattered glass, but nothing moved. No raccoon darted out. No dog growled from the shadows. I started thinking maybe I had imagined it after all. Maybe Mrs. Cooper had just gotten under my skin more than I wanted to admit. That's when I saw the door. It was tucked into a corner I must have missed earlier, half hidden behind a splintered wooden column that probably used to be part of a staircase. It didn't look like much, just a small door, about waist-high, hanging awkwardly off its hinges. The wood was rotted and soft-looking, dark stains spreading out from the bottom like something had once leaked through it. I frowned, shining my light over it. Had that been there before? I couldn't remember. And that alone made my skin crawl. The door was half open, just enough that I could see a sliver of darkness behind it. I nudged it with my foot. It barely moved, groaning under the pressure like it might snap apart. I tried pulling it open by hand, but the wood crumbled in my grip. Finally, I just kicked it. The door cracked and swung backward with a sharp, splintering noise that echoed way too loud in the dead silence of the house. I stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs, and pointed my flashlight through the opening. There were stairs, solid concrete stairs, leading straight down into the dark. The air that drifted up was cold and wet, smelling like old dirt and mold. It wrapped around me instantly, making me shiver, even though the night air outside was still warm. I hesitated. Every horror movie I had ever seen flashed through my mind all at once. This was the part where the idiot character, the one the audience always screamed at, went down the stairs without thinking. And here I was, standing at the top, actually considering it. I swallowed hard and tightened my grip on the broom handle. "I'm just checking," I whispered out loud, like that would somehow make it safer. "Just a quick look." I moved down the stairs slowly, each step groaning under my weight. My flashlight barely touched the bottom. It was like the darkness swallowed the light before it could even land. The basement was simple. Just a wide, low-ceilinged room with no windows and no color except for the gray concrete. Rusted metal shelves lined the walls, sagging under the weight of junk I couldn't even recognize. In the corners, old trash and broken furniture were piled up like little nests. But it wasn't the trash that caught my attention. At the far end of the basement, something was wrong. The back wall wasn't just cracked or crumbling, it was broken open. There was a gaping hole, big enough for a person to walk through without ducking. I crept closer, every instinct in my body screaming to turn around and leave. I ignored it, shining my light directly into the hole. It wasn't just a hole. It was a tunnel, a natural cave that sloped downward into the earth. The walls rough and jagged, the floor uneven and dirt-packed. It didn't look like something anyone had dug. It looked like it had always been there, hidden just behind the thin wall of the basement. I aimed my flashlight into the tunnel, trying to see how far it went. The beam disappeared into blackness after a few feet. That was when I saw them. Two small red lights blinked open deep in the tunnel. Eyes. I froze, the breath catching painfully in my throat. Another pair of red eyes blinked open beside the first. Then another. And another. The low growl started again, but this time it wasn't one sound, it was several, overlapping and echoing off the tunnel walls. I didn't wait to see what they belonged to. I bolted for the stairs, racing up two at a time, the broom handle forgotten on the basement floor. I slammed the rotten door shut behind me, shoving it hard until it wedged awkwardly against the frame. A second later, something heavy slammed into the other side. The door rattled so violently I thought it would come right off the hinges. One of the old wooden boards cracked loose, and for just a second, I saw through the gap. The red eyes were still there, staring right at me. I stumbled backward, heart hammering so hard I thought it might actually tear itself out of my chest. The growls faded slowly, and the shuffling footsteps retreated back down the stairs, swallowed by the dark. I didn't waste another second. I ran out of the house, tripping over the front step, barely managing to catch myself before I face-planted onto the cracked driveway. Across the street, Mrs. Cooper was standing on her porch. She was still wearing that same thick sweater, but this time, her arms were folded tightly across her chest. She stared at me like she had been waiting for this exact moment. "I heard a scream," she called out. "Are you all right, dear?" I forced a smile, trying to act like everything was fine even though I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. "I think there's raccoons or something in the basement," I said, my voice cracking halfway through. Mrs. Cooper didn't smile. She just watched me carefully, her expression unreadable, like she knew exactly what was really down there. And that was when I knew, deep in my gut, that whatever I had seen, it wasn't something as simple as animals. By morning, my hands were still shaking. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just ignore it and pretend it would go away. So after the sun rose and other people started moving around the neighborhood, I pulled out my phone and looked up the number for animal control. I wasn't exactly sure what to say, but I figured something is living in my basement would be enough to get someone's attention. When a guy answered, his voice casual and a little bored, I explained as calmly as I could. "I think there's something in the basement of my house," I said. "Maybe a raccoon, or multiple. I don't really know. They have red eyes." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a little chuckle. "Red eyes?" he said. "Sure it wasn't just the reflection from your flashlight? Happens with animals sometimes." "Maybe," I said quickly, not wanting to sound crazy, "but I heard growling too. And there's more than one." He promised to send someone out within the hour. I thanked him and immediately got out of the car, standing awkwardly at the end of my cracked driveway. I wasn't going back in that house until backup arrived. The wait felt endless, even though it was probably less than 40 minutes. When the animal control truck finally rolled up, I almost cried from relief. A man climbed out, tall and broad, wearing a heavy white exterminator suit that made him look like he was about to walk into a toxic waste zone. Heavy boots, thick gloves, a helmet with a face shield. He looked prepared for anything. That made me feel a little braver. "Morning," he said, grabbing a large metal trap from the back of the truck. "You're the one who called?" I nodded quickly and led him toward the house. I explained as much as I could without sounding like a total lunatic, that I heard growls, saw multiple sets of eyes, and that there was a broken part of the basement wall leading to some kind of tunnel. He gave me a look like he thought I was exaggerating, but to his credit, he didn't say anything. He just followed me through the front door, his boots crunching over the broken glass and debris still littering the floor. I pointed to the basement door. "Down there," I said, stepping aside. He nodded and headed down first, flashlight out, moving carefully but confidently. I followed behind him, keeping close enough that I could grab his jacket if I needed to. But when we reached the bottom of the stairs, my stomach dropped. The basement was different. The back wall, the one that had been broken open with a tunnel leading deep underground, was fine, perfectly intact. There wasn't even a crack. Worse, there was an old rusted shelf pushed up against it, stacked with junk, empty boxes, rusted tools, a few broken jars. I stood there, blinking, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "No hole," the guy said, glancing at me over his shoulder. I shook my head. "It was there last night, I swear. It was a huge hole. A cave. I saw it." He gave me a polite, slightly patronizing smile. "Animals can move fast," he said. "Maybe they dragged some junk over. Maybe you just got turned around. Basements can feel different at night." I didn't argue. I didn't know how to explain what I had seen without sounding completely out of my mind. He spent the next 20 minutes sweeping his flashlight over every corner of the basement. He checked the piles of garbage, tapped along the walls, even lifted a few broken boxes. Nothing. No nests, no droppings, no tracks, no signs of animals at all. Finally, he turned back to me. "I can leave a trap," he said. "Just in case something's hiding. If we catch anything, call the number on the card. I'll swing by and pick it up." I agreed immediately. At that point, I would have agreed to anything just to get some proof I wasn't losing my mind. He set up the trap, a heavy steel cage baited with some kind of strong-smelling meat, and showed me how it worked. It was simple enough. If something went inside, the door would snap shut behind it. He packed up his gear, gave me a card with his number, and waved as he pulled out of the driveway. I stood there alone again, staring at the house. The sun was high in the sky, bright and warm. Birds chirped from the trees. A neighbor 2 houses down was mowing his lawn. It should have felt normal, safe, but it didn't. The house loomed behind me, broken and rotting, and even in the daylight, it felt like something inside was watching. I thought about leaving, about just getting in my car and never coming back, but I had spent every cent I had on this place. There was no backup plan, no second chance, so I stayed. I spent the rest of the day working in the yard, pulling weeds, moving fallen branches, and picking up trash. I kept my phone in my pocket, the animal control guy's number pulled up, ready to hit dial the second I heard anything from inside. And all day long, I did hear things. Growls, scraping, sometimes the sound of something running across the floorboards inside the house. Light, quick footsteps that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up, but every time I crept close enough to peek through a window or cracked door, the house was still. I didn't go back inside that day. I told myself I would check the trap tomorrow. That night, sitting in my car again, I stared at the house through the windshield. The broken windows were dark, empty. But I could feel it. Something was still down there. By the time the sun came up again, I had made up my mind. I needed a better flashlight. The tiny beam from my phone wasn't cutting it, not if I had to go back into that basement. I drove straight to Home Depot the minute it opened, still wearing yesterday's jeans and a sweatshirt that smelled like dirt and fear. I must have looked half crazed when I stomped down the aisle toward the flashlights, because the employee standing there gave me a wide-eyed look and took a careful step back. "I need the brightest flashlight you have," I said, my voice a little sharper than I meant it to be. Without a word, he reached up and handed me a heavy-duty tactical flashlight that looked like it could double as a weapon. I didn't even check the price. I grabbed it, tossed a handful of spare batteries into my cart, paid, and bolted back to my car. The whole way back to the house, I tried to convince myself it would be fine, that the trap would be empty, that maybe the animal control guy was right and I had just imagined the tunnel, the eyes, the growls. Maybe my mind had played tricks on me after too many hours of stress and exhaustion. But deep down, I already knew better. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a long time, gripping the flashlight so tightly my knuckles turned white. The house stood silent and broken in front of me. The front door swinging slightly in the breeze. It looked exactly the same, but it didn't feel the same. Not even close. I forced myself to move, one step at a time, across the driveway, up the broken front steps, through the door that hung loose on its hinges. Inside, the air felt heavier somehow, thicker. Every breath I took tasted like dust and rot. I flipped on the flashlight and pointed it straight at the basement door. The wood was still cracked from when I had kicked it open days ago, hanging crooked in the frame. I nudged it with my foot, and it creaked inward with a sound like a dying animal. The second the door opened, I heard them. The growls. Low. Rumbling. Furious. I shivered and stepped inside. The beam of the flashlight was so bright it lit up the entire staircase and half the basement beyond. I crept down slowly, every step making the concrete colder under my sneakers. When I reached the bottom, I froze. The shelf was gone. The wall was broken again, just like before, a gaping, jagged hole leading deep into the earth. It wasn't just a tunnel anymore. It looked wider, deeper, almost like it had been breathing while I was gone, stretching itself open. And the eyes were back, dozens of them, red, unblinking, staring at me from the darkness of the tunnel. But that wasn't what made my stomach twist. The trap, the heavy metal cage we had set just yesterday, was rattling violently. Something inside of it was thrashing and slamming against the bars hard enough to make the whole thing jump and scrape across the floor. I shined the flashlight straight at it, and froze. There was something inside. It was small, no bigger than a child. At first I thought maybe it was just a wild animal, some twisted, hairless thing that had gotten trapped and was panicking, but then it turned toward me. It had a face. Not an animal's face. A human face. Or at least, it should have been. The skin was stretched tight over sharp bones, the mouth too wide and filled with sharp, uneven teeth. One eye sat far too high on its forehead, while the other drooped low near the jaw. It wasn't a person. It wasn't anything close to a person. I wanted to scream. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. And then the others moved. 3 of them bolted out of the tunnel at once, rushing toward me with inhuman speed. Their movements were jerky and wrong, like puppets being yanked by invisible strings. I stumbled backward, trying to turn and run for the stairs. My foot caught the edge of the bottom step and I went down hard, slamming my elbow against the concrete. The flashlight flew out of my hand, spinning across the floor. The beam swung wildly, sending the basement into strobe-like flashes of light and shadow. Before I could even push myself up, one of the creatures latched onto my ankle. Its teeth sank deep into my skin, sharp and hot, and I screamed. Another one leapt onto my arm, sinking its jagged teeth into the soft flesh just below my elbow. I tried to shake it off, tried to kick at the one gnawing on my foot, but they were too strong. Way stronger than anything that size should have been. The third one grabbed my other leg and pulled hard, dragging me toward the tunnel. I thrashed and kicked, grabbing at anything I could reach. The rough concrete, the broken steps, even the splintered edges of the old doorframe. Nothing helped. They were too fast, too strong, and there were too many. I screamed louder, hoping maybe someone would hear me. Mrs. Cooper. A random jogger. Anyone. But there was no one. The last thing I saw before they pulled me through the hole in the wall was the trap, still rattling, still holding that twisted, child-sized creature. It was staring at me. Its one high eye blinked slowly. And then I was gone, swallowed by the dark. They dragged me so fast I barely had time to register what was happening. My head slammed into rocks sticking out from the tunnel walls. My arms scraped against jagged stones, tearing my skin open in long, burning lines. I kicked and fought and screamed until my throat was raw, but it didn't matter. The creatures were taking me somewhere. The deeper they dragged me, the hotter the air got. At first, it was just a little warm, like walking into a musty basement in summer. But as we went farther, it turned suffocating. The heat pressed against my skin, thick and wet, clinging to every inch of me. It felt like I was being cooked alive. The smell changed too. It wasn't just damp earth anymore. It was something worse. A thick, rotting stink that made my stomach churn and my throat burn every time I breathed in. It smelled like death. Like dead animals left to rot in the sun. Like something that should not have been alive at all. I tried to claw at the tunnel walls, tried to grab onto anything that could stop them from pulling me deeper, but my hands were slick with blood and the stone was too smooth, too wet. I was helpless. The tunnel around us began to change. The walls weren't just rock anymore, they were alive. Thick veins pulsed along the stone, glowing faintly red, like something massive was breathing deep inside the earth. The farther they dragged me, the brighter the veins glowed. It lit the tunnel in a sick, pulsing light that made everything look wrong and twisted. We entered a huge open space. It was massive, way bigger than the basement above it. The ceiling arched so high overhead that the red glow barely touched it. The walls were covered in those throbbing, vein-like vines, and the floor was slick with something that looked like blood but felt thicker when it touched my shredded legs. They let go of me all at once. I crumpled onto the ground, too weak to stand, too broken to crawl. I tried to push myself up, but my arms barely responded. Every movement sent burning pain shooting through my body. When I looked up, I realized I was surrounded. Hundreds of them. The creatures covered the floor, the walls, even the ceiling, clinging to the pulsing veins like monstrous insects. Their eyes glowed red in the dim light, unblinking, staring at me with a hunger that made my blood run cold. But they weren't the worst thing in the room. At the far end of the cavern, something else waited. It was bigger than anything I had ever seen, taller than a man, wide and bloated and wrong. It looked like it had been stitched together from human parts, arms growing out of its sides, legs bent at impossible angles, mouths opening and closing along its body where no mouths should have been. It started moving toward me. Slow, steady steps. Its legs clicked and scraped against the stone floor with every step, The ground trembled under its weight. I tried to scream, but only a dry, broken gasp came out. I tried to crawl backward, but my body refused to listen. As it moved closer, I saw more details. Its skin was stretched too tight, bulging in some places, tearing open in others. Where its chest should have been, there were faces, dozens of human faces. Some screaming silently, some frozen in agony. One face near the top blinked at me. It was still alive. The thing reached down with one massive, gnarled hand and grabbed me by the arm. Its grip was cold and wet, and it squeezed so hard I thought my bones would snap. I fought weakly, kicking at it, punching with what little strength I had left. It didn't care. It lifted my arm and pulled, hard. I felt a sharp, burning pain as something ripped. I screamed as I watched one of my fingers tear free from my hand. Blood poured down my wrist hot and fast. The creature lifted the severed finger to its body, and the skin there split open like a mouth. Vein-like tendrils reached out, wrapping around the finger, pulling it inside. I understood then. It was building itself, piece by piece, finger by finger, body by body. And I was next. The smaller creatures crept closer, hissing and growling, ready to take whatever was left when the big one was done. I forced myself to move. I pushed through the pain, through the terror, through the dizzying heat. I saw a pile of bones nearby, ribs and skulls tangled together in a dusty heap. I dragged myself toward it, each inch feeling like I was tearing my own body apart. The big creature screamed, a deep, vibrating sound that rattled my teeth in my skull. It charged at me. In a blind panic, I grabbed a cracked, yellowed skull from the pile and swung it as hard as I could. The skull slammed into one of the creature's many mouths, and for a second, it recoiled, hissing and thrashing wildly. I didn't waste time. I dragged myself toward the tunnel we had come through, ignoring the blood pouring from my wounds, ignoring the screaming from the walls, ignoring the things skittering toward me. But the tunnel wasn't the same anymore. It twisted and turned, splitting into different paths, all glowing red with those pulsing veins. I picked the cleanest-looking tunnel and crawled as fast as I could. Behind me, I heard the creature roar again. The walls shook. Rocks rained down around me. I crawled faster. Every time I thought I was getting closer to the exit, the tunnel shifted, turning me around, leading me back toward the cavern. It was a maze, a trap. I turned a corner and slammed into a dead end, solid stone, slick and pulsing with heat. I turned around just in time to see the creature closing in. It moved fast, its many arms reaching for me. Before I could react, it grabbed me by the neck and lifted me off the ground like I weighed nothing. I kicked and clawed at its arms, gasping for breath, but my vision went black at the edges. It carried me back to the cavern and threw me down hard. I heard something crack inside me, a deep, sickening sound. And I knew it was bad. I lay there, helpless, barely able to lift my head. The creature reached for me again, grabbing another one of my fingers, yanking it free like tearing petals off a flower. I screamed. My voice broke into raw, jagged sobs. The walls of the cavern pulsed and shifted, and more creatures crawled out of the tunnels, filling the space with a wet, slithering sound. I thought it was over. I thought I was dead. But then I heard it. A voice. A man's voice, shouting my name, Adeline. I turned my head, blinking through blood and tears. A flashlight beam cut through the dark, a sap swinging wildly. It was the animal control guy. He stood at the edge of the cavern, eyes wide with horror. He didn't hesitate. He rushed toward me, jabbing at the creatures with a long spear-like tool he must have brought with him. The smaller ones shrieked and scattered, but the big one roared and charged at him. He grabbed my arm, yanking me up roughly. I screamed as my injured body protested, but I clung to him anyway. We ran, or he half-dragged me, back toward the tunnels. The creatures swarmed around us, clawing and biting. He stabbed one through the head with the spear, and it collapsed with a shriek. When it fell, the others around it screamed too, like they could feel its death. I shouted at him, "Kill them! Just kill them!" He fought harder, stabbing anything that got too close. We stumbled and crawled our way through the tunnels, heading toward the faint light of the basement beyond. I saw the broken wall ahead. Freedom. But the creatures weren't giving up. The big one roared behind us, shaking the tunnels so hard rocks fell from the ceiling. We reached the basement just as the tunnel started to collapse. The animal control guy grabbed the cage, the one with the twisted, human-like creature inside, and hurled it back into the cavern. The second it hit the ground, the veins in the walls twitched and started pulling the tunnel closed, sealing it shut with a wet, tearing sound. In seconds, the wall was solid again. No tunnel, no creatures, nothing. I collapsed onto the floor, blood pouring from a dozen wounds, my whole body screaming in pain. The man lifted me carefully, cradling me against his chest. I don't remember much after that. Everything went black. I woke up in a hospital room, wrapped in so many bandages I felt like a mummy. Every inch of me hurt. I turned my head slowly and looked at my hand. 3 fingers. 2 were missing completely. I wanted to cry, but I didn't even have the strength. The doctor came in and told me I was lucky to be alive. He said the man who found me said I'd been trapped under a collapsed wall in the abandoned house. I nodded. I didn't correct him. Nobody would have believed the truth anyway. He gave me instructions about resting and healing, then left me alone. I laid there, staring at the bandages. Somewhere, deep beneath that house, my 2 missing fingers were still there. Still part of that thing.